an array of speakers from organizations joining us to tell us about their legislative priorities. But first, we would like you to hear what legislative priorities we will be pushing for in the General Assembly this year. And I would like to start by introducing Julia Tanner, our advocacy coordinator, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Deb. We all appreciate your leadership, and we're also grateful to all of you for joining today. I want to start by congratulating all of you. We've had a very productive year from a legislative standpoint, and a lot of great new laws would not have passed were it not for you and your colleagues here in the League. It takes everyone. I am going to introduce you to our state legislative committee and our state issue committee leaders, and we'll let you know our priorities for the coming session. So first, give yourselves a big pat on the back. Great legislation that passed included no excuse absentee voting, so voters can vote without having to think of what excuse is required to let them vote early. There's no longer a photo ID requirement at the polls, although other ID is still required to secure our elections. Same-day voter registration passed. That will go into effect in October of 2022. We helped ensure that there would be convenient drop-off locations at the polls for absentee ballots, which helped many of us and our friends and families bypass lines at the polls during the pandemic and simply drop off our ballots. A raft of gun violence prevention bills passed, resolutions supporting the Equal Rights Amendment, a major shift towards renewable energy and carbon neutrality, and initial legislation to improve criminal justice in the Commonwealth, although more needs to be done. The League worked so hard to help support these results. We litigated. We supervised Harvard Law student interns who did research to help us determine the laws in other states. We sent letters to the governor. We met with legislators. And so many of you stepped up and provided citizen strength to be reckoned with. Many of you sent letters or postcards. You wrote letters to the editor. You made phone calls. Some of you joined issue groups to talk with other colleagues in the League about this. You educated friends and family, you met with your lawmakers, and a few even delivered testimony, having become experts through all of this work in the League and elsewhere. It's so very helpful, everything that you do, and it's easy to get started. We'll be offering a training tomorrow, which will help either experienced advocates, but also those of you who are new, learn some tips, particularly for advocating now during the pandemic. We'll have one of our state delegates there to help with it, provide the training. While only the president speaks for the League, when we contact our lawmakers, we can and do voice our own opinions. And we try to always remember to log our action on the Advocacy Challenge, which is a simple form that we fill out each time we've talked with a lawmaker or other state official, so that our local leagues might win a prize. No matter how much or how little you did, what is important is that everyone does something. So I will be putting a link for the training session sign up in the chat later on, and you can watch your email in coming weeks for a League Day invitation. And now I'd love to introduce the State Legislative Committee. We will be tracking priority bills as they move through the General Assembly. This short legislative session will consist of only 30 days, starting on January 13th, although it may be followed by a special session. The Legislative Committee consists of our President, Deb Wake, as well as Janet Boyd, Ernie Bridges, Carolyn Kaywood, Mary Crutchfield, Beth Obenshane, Grace White, and myself. And of course, our Vice President, Joan Port, will be meeting with us as well. We will work to guide the League through the legislative session. The State League issue committees also are going to be working on this. They are not to be confused with our study committees, which are led by Janet Gorn and produce policy positions from which we can advocate. The issue groups, which are now going to be managed by Joan Port, were conceived of by President Wake. They provide a forum where members can learn from each other statewide, work on education, and some of them also will be working on advocacy. This is a way that we can get engaged and learn about an issue or mentor others while meeting virtually and making new friends from across the state. The earliest League issue groups have now been meeting and working for almost a year. We owe much to the suggestions of local League presidents and action coordinators who gave thought to who would be good founding members for these groups, and to the pioneering coordinators who have been carving new paths, including several who led massive advocacy efforts and even testified in the General Assembly. The groups and the coordinators so far are as follows. Affordable housing, chaired by Alice Toussignant. And as I introduce each of you, if you can give a wave, that is great, thank you. Campaign finance, coordinated by Janet Boyd. Diversity, equity, and inclusion, coordinated by Doris Bay. Hi, Doris. Election security, coordinated by Lisa Koteen-Gerchek. Lisa. Environment, coordinated by Sonia Ballinger. And it was previously coordinated by Monica Florio and Carolyn Kaywood. So shout out to them for their hard work to date as well. Gun violence prevention, coordinated by Christine Payne with advice from Ruth Hoffman. The Justice Committee, coordinated by Kit Murphy McNally. Redistricting, coordinated by Chris DeRosa. And voter access, coordinated by Pam Berg and Donald Craig. We have coordinators from throughout the Commonwealth, and we have members from throughout the Commonwealth as well, and many of them are providing expertise and input, while others, we like to say, are flies on the wall, listening, learning, and absorbing. Yes, I will post those names in the chat later to make sure that everyone receives their due recognition and that you can contact them if you happen to know them. Otherwise, you can contact Joan Port. She has now graciously stepped forward to manage these groups. I will be placing her email address in the chat. And she has plans to launch more of the initial groups that were conceived of by Deb. Any member who would like to lead a committee can also contact Deb, can also contact Joan. Particularly, she's looking to launch groups on childcare, domestic violence and harassment, education, and transportation. So you'll be able to reach her at firstvp@lwv-va.org. And again, I'll put that in the chat. So please, let's just give the Legislative Committee and those amazing issue group coordinators a round of applause, if you don't mind. Thanks to everyone for their hard work and to our leaders for their leadership. Now, the Virginia League's top legislative priorities for the coming session may change as the session moves forward. Some priorities tend to move, while others we find need help. Sometimes legislation is dropped that really suddenly moves to the forefront and we realize we can push it through. Be aware that if you don't see your favorite on this list that I'm about to deliver, it may arise during the session or next. Rest assured, we'll be watching closely. You can certainly join us for some bill tracking, and we will send out action blasts. You'll see them in your email. I love to call them blasts because they're thought out carefully, but when you see them, please be prepared to take action. So here are the current main priorities for this session. We will be asking the General Assembly to make permanent the temporary supports for voter access that we helped get through the special session so that people could vote safely and securely during the pandemic. The League was particularly involved in seeking convenient drop-off locations for absentee ballots at polling places throughout the Commonwealth. Additional items that passed in that bill, which was the first to pass through the general session, the special session, were also removing the witness requirement for absentee ballots, which was an initiative that the League had also litigated for, and allowing error correction for procedural errors that voters can inadvertently make on their absentee ballots. We will be seeking to make these permanent. When you look at other states, for example, witness signatures are not required in 39 states. This requirement can be a barrier to voting, particularly for voters who live alone or are disabled or immunocompromised. Or if you look at dropping off ballots, it allows voting that is safe, secure, and convenient. Many people have family and work obligations that make it difficult for them to make it in person to a polling place during normal operating hours, and yet they would like to hand deliver that ballot themselves. So these are measures that we will be pushing for. In addition, we're going to be seeking pre-clearance at the state level of practices that are restricted under the Federal Voting Rights Act. This law will help Virginia avoid making elections changes that would disenfranchise voters, such as restricting interpreter services or consolidating polling places in a location that is far from public transportation. When localities do this, it is helpful to have another set of eyes on them. And in the past, the Federal Department of Justice was reviewing these changes. However, that is currently on hold and will remain so for the foreseeable future. And so some states are looking at setting up their own pre-clearance processes. There was a bill that was filed last session that is going to come back around, and we will be supporting it. Another priority is going to be what we like to call the 100% right to vote constitutional amendment. We believe that every Virginia citizen who is 18 years or older should have the right to vote. Virginia is one of only 5 states that take away people's civil rights, including the right to vote, when people are convicted of a felony, and we do not automatically restore them after their release or parole or probation. And this is just one example of how the law would apply, but it's a very clear example. The other 45 states don't take away those rights, or they restore them automatically once the person has paid their debt to society. It is a belief that no matter who we are, we participate in our democracy and we have the right to vote. Felony disenfranchisement also has a disproportionate impact on communities of color. According to the Sentencing Project, Americans who are of voting age are 4 times more likely to lose their voting rights if they are African American. We believe that this cannot stand. So another law that we are going to, well, set of laws that we are going to be supporting involve campaign finance reform. So many of the matters that are important to voters could be affected if one voter or group of voters has an outside impact based upon, for example, their campaign contributions or their finance. Campaign finance laws protect representative democracy from distortion and appearances of distortion, and they add valuable transparency so that voters are able to make informed choices. Unfortunately, Virginia's campaign finance laws have been ranked 47th out of 50th in America. We actually received a failing grade from a public integrity project. We can do better. So we will be advocating for campaign finance reform. We are also interested in having our state join new initiative. Well, not for the League. We've been pushing for this for a while. I'm just changing topics. The next topic is national popular vote. We would like to join the National Interstate Compact. The goal of this compact is to ensure that every vote matters in presidential elections so that all voters have a fairly equal voice in the election. And even though it's a nationwide effort, it is accomplished at the state level by having states join this interstate compact. So we will be pushing for that. And then finally, we will be looking to support additional broadband coverage. This is a matter of geographic as well as economic equity and access for government, education, and economic opportunities. We don't want to have children sitting in parking lots outside of McDonald's to do their homework. I mean, that's just tragic. We don't need to have that. We should have broadband wherever it is needed throughout the Commonwealth. The governor is aware of this need, and his last budget during the special session did allocate more for broadband, but more is needed. And we also need to get rid of some anti-competitive measures that keep municipalities from being able to put up their own broadband when they have insufficient broadband in their communities. So we will be advocating for that. So that essentially concludes our list of priorities for the coming General Assembly. You'll see them coming to you in email, and we actually sent out an action blast on Monday. Look for an email in your inbox or perhaps in your all mail or spam that came from the League of Women Voters of Virginia. Make sure to set your filters so that you do get our emails, and we give you step-by-step instructions and talking points. It's really easy. If you contact your legislators, you'll get either voicemail, and you can just leave a message saying what you'd like, or else you get a polite staffer who's happy to write down your message because that is their job. They're not going to argue with you. They are there to listen. So thank you so much for listening to our priorities. Please congratulate your members who have worked hard to advance the achievements that we have made so far this year. I hope everyone will join in helping us accomplish our new goals for this coming General Assembly session. Really appreciated the time to talk with you.
Thank you, Julie, and thank you, Legislative Committee and all of the interest groups who are working on all of the issues. And we look forward to another productive General Assembly session. Our next speaker is Commissioner of Elections, Chris Piper, and I have to acknowledge how well the elections went in Virginia. We had so many changes in laws, we had a pandemic, and I don't know, everything that we had, and we weathered that storm really well. So Commissioner Piper, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you. I want to make sure everybody can hear me. We're good there. Okay. Deb, I can't tell you how much I appreciate those words. The last few weeks have been trying for an election official, to say the least. And I just want to start out, if anybody has the opportunity to read or view the video of Gabriel Sterling from Georgia, he spoke pretty passionately about something that all election officials are feeling at this moment in time. Virginia has not escaped some of that, but I'll address some of those issues a little bit later, but I want to focus mostly on the upcoming legislative session and some of our priorities going forward for 2021. But yes, I appreciate you saying that. We did have a very successful election in 2020. In spite of the unprecedented pandemic, Virginia started out 2020 not set up to hold an election in the way that we've done in the past, because we have crammed. In 2016, we crammed 3.5 million voters into polling places over the course of 13 hours. And, you know, prior to that, we had only voted 566,000 votes. This year, prior to Election Day, we had already cast 2.8 million votes prior to Election Day. And as you've seen, we had unprecedented turnout. 74.6% was the last number I saw. And that is 100% due to the fact that Virginia did what I think was the best thing to do. And we had great support from the administration and from groups like yourself to ensure that what we provided voters in Virginia was access to the ballot in a number of different ways. I'm going to steal a line from my colleague in Colorado. He's always described Colorado as the Burger King of voting. You can have it your way. And that's what we set out to do in Virginia. We wanted to make ballots by mail very accessible We wanted to make the voting in person on election day experience incredibly safe and secure. We wanted to ensure that people had access to vote early so that we could spread out the number of people voting over the course of the 45 days. We were ahead of the game a little bit because the General Assembly had already set up and established no excuse absentee voting. And while we didn't mail a ballot to everyone, which we felt was an undertaking that we were not prepared for here in Virginia. And so we decided to continue with the application, but with a no excuse, it made it very quick. You brought up earlier, Julia, some of the changes that occurred. The first one being the no witness signature requirement. That was in place for the June primary and then in place again for November, and the legislation that came about for that. The cure process was an incredibly successful endeavor. Many voters who would have normally had their votes, their ballot rejected and not know about it until after the election were given the opportunity to correct the error so that their ballot could be counted. We are looking, well, I'll talk about that in a minute. The prepaid postage was provided. I thought that was a huge help for a number of individuals. And then, of course, I think the best thing, the one that I feel most excited about, and especially going forward, is the drop-off locations and having the accessibility for individuals to just be able to drop off their ballot rather than stand in line or have to mail it in. Giving these different options allowed for us to have the record turnout that we had in Virginia, and I'm pretty excited about it. So as a result, I think if it's really important to do what Deb just did. And while I appreciate it, I got to sit in my little ivory tower in Richmond. I did not have to engage with the public on a day after day basis like our local elections officials. Those of you, I'm sure many of you worked the polls as you often do or worked early voting. So I would personally like to thank you for your work and engaging with the public during this pandemic and sacrificing your time and also concerns about health during this pandemic. So if you have an opportunity, first of all, pat yourself on the back, and I thank you for your work. Second of all, take a moment, if you can, to send a letter to your registrar, letting them know that them and their staff deserve a lot of credit for what went on. They dealt with numerous changes. They were the ones implementing them, making sure that the voters had the opportunity to cure their ballots, that they worked out the prepaid postage, that they secured drop-off locations and ensured that they were that those ballots were securely transported during the election. You know, they did a lot of that work, and so if you have an opportunity to send them a thank you note, I would appreciate it. I know they would as well, especially as we're seeing the national dialogue right now and the way it is. But while it's important that we talk about the successes we had, we also have to discuss you know, where we can improve. And so there's definitely areas that I think we can improve. The first one is election night reporting. And while we went on a messaging campaign to explain how it was going to work, and if anybody was paying attention to VPAP, they had a great, you know, animated model of how it would be different from 2018 to 2020. And we went on a tear with the media trying to explain how this was going to work. We explained it to the parties and to candidates. But at the same time, it's insider baseball. And so people saw election day in-person totals coming in, and then after about 11 o'clock, then we started to see the 2.8 million votes that had already been cast starting to be updated. And for the casual observer, that was a confusing change, and we understand that. And so we are looking at ways in which we can improve that process. It is definitely something we're going to be addressing. So part of that, as you know, since I've been commissioner, after every general election, November general election, we have produced a post-election report We will be doing the same again this year. The goal is to have it ready by the January board meeting, to have it in advance of the General Assembly session. I will say there's a lot of litigation that happened. We got sued more times than, I got sued more times in the past year than I did in my first 2 years in the job. So I guess I'm proud of that. I don't know, but either way, we've had a lot of lawsuits. We had a lot of changes. Obviously, we had mistakes, we had errors, and we want to be transparent about it. We want to make sure that we address all of those issues, and then we can have a discussion about how best to improve on those issues. And if we can do that before the General Assembly, then maybe at least it can be part of the dialogue and can influence legislation if needed. So that post-election report will be coming out. I believe the board meeting, I just saw it come up, I believe the board meeting will be on January 12th, the day before the start of session. So we will have the post-election report out there publicly beforehand, assuming we can get it done in time. But there is a lot of work to do, not only an election cleanup, but we also have the Electoral College meeting, which is going to happen on December 14th. So there's a lot of work that we're going to be doing along with preparing for legislation. Our goal is January 12th. I'm not sure that we'll meet that, but we're going to try. Other area that we can improve upon, and you talked a little bit about this at the beginning, Julia, is accessibility for voters. And while I think we are a very accessible state, I think we can do better in certain areas, especially with the visually impaired. The visually impaired had a very difficult time when it comes to casting a ballot in Virginia this year. Although we were able to come up with a fix and work through that, there is still a little bit of work we can do in that area. And then we will be doing audits coming forth in 2021, risk limiting audits as we've done before. And then so I think that we may see some legislation on that issue here as well. While we are allowed to conduct audits, it's a little bit different in Virginia as it is in some other states that are doing them regularly now. The other big issue that's coming up in 2021 is redistricting. And so we know that we have the new redistricting commission for the Department of Elections. It's not that we don't care, it's just our job doesn't start until we get the actual maps. So we will be looking forward to getting those. And as soon as that process begins, it is a labor-intensive manual process that we have to go through in order to implement the new maps. And it does take, about 99 days. That is our target. We're looking at ways to make that more efficient, but it will mean that there will be some overlap between us trying to get the new maps implemented and candidates filing their petitions. But we intend to have that ready to go 45 days prior to the primary. So you'll also be looking at legislation that moves the primary from June to August. And that is pretty standard. It's happened for the last 30 years. It takes a while to address the movement of the lines in the petition. So in 2011, it was moved to August. In 2001, it was also moved to August. And so we'll be looking at that as well. As you mentioned, the legislation codifying the changes that were implemented through the budget language in the special session, we anticipate seeing that as well. And then, of course, the primary being moved. I do not anticipate major changes to our processes or overhaul or like universal mail-in. I don't know if that will come, but it is a shortened session this year. And so I don't know if we'll be seeing anything like that, but we will be monitoring, as we always do, those pieces of legislation and working with the General Assembly and the Governor's Office to ensure that whatever comes out of the General Assembly is something that we can implement and implement successfully in the time that's required. So real quick, I wanted in my last couple of minutes to address some of the misinformation out there. You all are very informed, but wanted to always take an opportunity to talk about what's out there. There's a lot of talk about Dominion voting machines. No, they don't use Smartmatic. It's a whole separate company. No, they were not founded by Hugo Chavez. They're an American company. And the fact of the matter is that when you hear this algorithm stuff out there, it's Dominion is a paper ballot voting machine. So in Virginia, all of the votes that were counted and reported on November 3rd and the days afterward were cast using paper ballots. So there's a paper record. So if we were to do a recount like they did on Dominion systems in Georgia, you would find that the systems counted the ballots in a consistent manner with what the paper record shows. That's exactly what happened in Georgia during their recount. It's also what happened in Wisconsin, thousands and thousands and millions of ballots cast actually, and the results were consistent with what the machines reported. I'll also point out, yes, we do use Dominion in Virginia. There's 29 localities that use those. I would also point out the CISA, which is a Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, a division within the Department of Homeland Security, the National Association of State Election Directors, which I happen to be a board member on, the National Associations of Secretaries of State, as well as the Election Assistance Commission, and then the the Governing Coordinating Council and the Sector Coordinating Council. These are organizations that are built to facilitate communication between vendors, governments, at all levels. And so anyway, they put out a statement about 12 days after the election, calling it the most secure election in the history of the United States. And I could not agree more. It really was something out of extraordinary. To go from 2016, where we did have breaches in voting registration databases, but no votes changed, to a situation in 2020 where there wasn't even an attempt. There was a work for misinformation and disinformation, but even that mostly failed. The work that the states, in partnership with the federal government and the local governments, the work that we did was amazing, and it showed. And so we can have confidence in the outcome of the election. You might also have read something about votes being flipped in Virginia at 4 o'clock in the morning. I don't know so basically in our review of that, there's a third-party organization that made a change or did something at 4 o'clock in the morning, but that wasn't our data. It didn't come from us. We didn't make a change like that. It would be actually impossible for us to make a change like that. So I think it's important for everybody to take a step back. And if you have questions, this opportunity to talk with local election officials or state election officials is a good idea. I will say, if anybody does have concerns, we have a change log. So every change that is made to our election night results over the course of the certification period is tracked, and the localities are required to give a reason for that change. So in Virginia, we're as transparent as you possibly can be. So any of those questions that come up, we have a solid answer for. And I think I overstepped my speaking time, but I'm happy to answer whatever questions there may be.
Thank you, Commissioner Piper. No, you're good. We do have a couple of questions about the split primaries. One woman says, our local registrar is concerned about the rumor that the upcoming primary will be split into 2 primaries in May, and then August, and then of course the November election. 3 elections in 2021 would break many localities. What can you say about this?
I've heard some discussion about that as well. I think that our initial response to that is it's not an easy thing to put on an election, let alone 4 more in a year because we have May, even though that's only a couple of localities, I think, at this point, if even that. And then we'd have the June primary, and then an August primary, and then a November general, especially coming off of 2020. The other thing that happens is the way in which Verus works. It would be a pretty monumental feat to pull off an election in June, and then again in August, and be doing redistricting at the same time. So I've heard that discussion. We are proceeding. We're working with all parties involved and talking about what our options are at this point.
Okay, we have time for maybe one more. Related to reporting, can you break down the central absentee precinct results into actual precinct results?
And that is something I'm going to have my team looking into and figuring out the best way to do that. The good news is that it is done in other localities or other states. So we are definitely going to be addressing that because it is something that I know is important, and I want to make sure that we're able to do. I think that's a high priority for us for sure.
Is there any consideration being given to tallying absentee or drop-off ballots as they are received so they can be included in the early count?
So they actually are. We're ahead of the game in this part as well in Virginia. By processing, I mean that they're actually opened up, they're checked to make sure that there are any errors, and then they're fed through the machine. And then the difference is that I think what's being considered or being asked about is whether they can be tabulated prior to election night. Right now, we don't tabulate until after the polls close. And in most localities, all machines, as soon as you tabulate them, those machines are done. You can't use them again. You might be able to use a new memory stick for them, but you're basically shutting down all of the machine for the rest of the election. So that's the issue that we had. We wanted to make sure localities were sent in localities were set up for having one machine in the central absentee precinct. Most localities. So they had to adjust this year to have more machines for their central absentee precinct in order to count all of those ballots and the early voting ballots that came in. So something that we're looking at for sure, and something that we're hoping to address. But at least in Virginia, we weren't like what Wisconsin had to deal with, where they couldn't actually start processing those ballots until election day.
Commissioner Piper, thank you so much for your time and your expertise. We really appreciate hearing from you, and we'll be in touch as we go into the General Assembly session. So thank you so much. Our next speaker is Kim Bobo, Executive Director of VICPP, the Virginia Interfaith Center for Public Policy. Welcome, Kim.
Thank you so much, Deb. Great to be with you all. I know many of you are very familiar with the work of Virginia Interfaith, whether it's Ann Murphy or Christine Payne or Carolyn Kaywood, like folks who've been super involved with both you all and with us. And I really appreciate and honor our relationship as an organization. So our priorities this year are like yours, very focused on how do we make Virginia fairer, more equitable, and for us really a focus on low-income folks. And so our top priority this year is the same as last year, which is trying to get paid sick days. We had a bill last year that got through the House and actually made it through the Senate the first time, but when it came back with the conference committee report, was killed on the Senate floor the last day of the session, of the regular session. And so we're trying again. And honestly, I wish I could be assured that we were going to get through. You would think in the midst of a pandemic that people would understand the importance of workers having a few paid sick days to take off. But it's going to be a struggle. Again, I think we have the votes in the House, but it's going to be a bit of a struggle in the Senate. The issue does pull off the charts. 96% of Democrats believe we should have paid sick days, and 72% of Republicans. So again, it's a bipartisan issue because, you know, we all get sick and people need a few sick days for themselves and for their family members. But it's also one of the few public policies that we could implement that would really help slow the virus. Not just this one, COVID-19, but any future viruses. Studies show that half of all coronaviruses, not just this, but others, are spread by food service workers. And so again, not just for this, but for all of our public health, passing a paid sick day standard would really matter. So, you know, we have a new report that's coming out that shows about a third of Virginia's service workers who work for large companies like McDonald's or our grocery stores, about a third of them have paid sick days. So 2/3 don't. And this includes grocery store workers. These grocery stores are thriving during the pandemic, and they ought to be providing paid sick days. So, you know, most everyone in the Senate says, yes, I support the concept, but, and the big but really comes around concerns about small businesses. And our argument back is that small businesses can't afford to not offer paid sick days, because if they have some of their workers get sick, it will infect everyone else and will infect their customers. And the best way for small businesses to thrive again in Virginia is for us to get the economy growing. We can only do that if we can curb the spread of this virus. So we believe strongly that this is a policy that does make sense in the midst of COVID-19. Now, some would say, well, let's just exempt small businesses defined as businesses with 50 or fewer employees, or even 25 and fewer employees. Well, when you do that, exempting 50 and below exempts 96% of businesses. And in fact, small businesses are the ones least likely to have paid sick days. So again, those who say, well, let's do it, but let's exempt businesses with 50 and below, it's really, they don't want to do anything. They don't want to pass a bill that will matter for workers. We believe there are several ways to sort of phase this in. You could do various sizes of businesses, but till we get everybody included in Virginia, that needs to be the standard. So we could do it that way. We could phase in different kinds of workers, home care and school personnel workers first and others later. But we need to have a goal of getting every worker in Virginia, at least every full-time worker in Virginia, some sort of paid sick day. So this is an issue. The drumbeat is not going to stop on this one. We're going to continue this year, and if we can't get it this session, because, you know, again, I think it's going to be a hard session for lots of reasons, we will come back again in 2022. Second priority for us is abolition of the death penalty. We think the time for this is now. We have Charnel Herring or Mike Mullen, one of them in Courts of Justice leadership, will be offering it in the House. And Senator Servell is leading the way in the Senate, but with Senator Stanley, Republican from Southwest, helping out as well. So again, we think we've got a very good shot at getting an abolition of the death penalty this year. And so we've made it really one of our top priorities. Third priority, last year we did a lot of work on the minimum wage bill, and for the last 2 years we've worked on various exemptions. Time is up. Okay, what happened? Okay, I'm back. I got a message that time is up. We are trying to get rid of the farm worker exemption on minimum wage. We've worked on that in the past and we'll continue to do that. And then finally, we will be doing some work around water and access to water for low-income folks. So we do have our lobby day that many of you have been a part of that is scheduled it's going to be a series of lobby days, so January 18th through 22nd. And on the last day of that, we will have some prayer vigils at lynching sites to help make the connection with the death penalty in Virginia and our historic lynching of people in Virginia. So we hope you'll join us, and we appreciate the partnership with you all. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see any questions in chat. Does anyone have any questions for Kim? Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you, Kim. Our next speaker is Jonathan Iglesias, the Executive Director of Virginia's Sexual and Domestic Violence Alliance. Welcome, Jonathan.
Hello, good morning. And actually, just a correction, I am not the executive director of the Action Alliance. I'm the policy director, but I'm not sure that I want that promotion, honestly. But I'm happy to be here and to talk with you all. And thank you for the invite again this year. And really just looking forward to connecting with folks and trying to see what we can build for the 2021 session. So, as I said, my name is Jonathan Iglesias. I'm the policy director for the Virginia Sexual and Domestic Violence Action Alliance. We are Virginia's leading voice on issues of sexual and domestic violence, representing 65 rape crisis centers and community-based domestic violence shelters across the state. In addition to being a policy voice on behalf of these local programs and communities and survivors, we also run a 24/7, 365 days a year statewide hotline that receives texts, chats, and phone calls connecting survivors, families, and friends with the resources that they might need in order to seek safety and healing and to respond to and prevent violence in their communities. So that's a little bit about who we are. If you're interested in checking us out, or if we are new to you, feel free to look for us online on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram, or visit our website at vsdvalliance.org. Every session, we work with our membership, those local programs across the state, and with our legislative allies and partners on a number of policy initiatives, from increasing access to trauma-informed healthcare, to addressing campus sexual assault, building the capacity of our state to effectively respond to violence and serve survivors. There's no shortage of issues on our plate, and many of these issues often cut across disciplines and allow us to partner with many of the speakers and policy leaders that you're hearing from today, all of whom I'm grateful for, and I feel like our values and kind of vision for a violence-free Virginia very much align with. Right now, the most pressing issue and our kind of top priority on behalf of our advocacy agencies and survivors statewide, which we will be continuing in 2021, is preventing sexual and domestic violence before it can occur. So currently, the Commonwealth invests $0 toward the important goal of preventing sexual and domestic violence through primary prevention and public health efforts. We are fortunate in Virginia to have a robust infrastructure to support service provision, so to provide medical advocacy for survivors who are needing support navigating those systems, legal advocacy, support groups and therapy for folks. We have a robust infrastructure to support immediate response to people who have experienced violence. But our infrastructure to support preventing violence is just not where it needs to be. So with limited federal funds, about 16 out of Virginia's 65 local agencies are currently able to engage in what I would call this life-saving critical work in their communities. The good news is that in 2020, this past session, our policy leaders recognized this critical need to prevent violence and helped to establish a first ever state fund to support and expand those efforts while allocating $1.5 million over the biennium to support those efforts. Unfortunately, that was one of the initiatives that had to be put on hold due to the COVID-19 pandemic and just the enormous fiscal impact that that had on our state budget. So the fund currently exists and is written into state code, and state partners at Department of Social Services, Department of Health, and the Action Alliance and local programs are all kind of scheming about how to most effectively run that program. There are just no funds in the fund that has been in existence since July 1. So that said, the pandemic has brought us lots of interesting circumstances, and the critical need to prevent violence has only become more apparent during this crisis. We have seen the rates of sexual and domestic violence drastically increase as a direct result of the pandemic. Virginia's statewide hotline saw a 73% increase in contacts during March and April of 2020, while over half of our local agencies have reported an increased demand for services, and 87% have reported significant shifts in their staffing and their work to address the complex and ongoing housing, financial, and safety needs of survivors during the pandemic. A lot of survivors are just have much more complex, as you can imagine, needs related to housing insecurity, to job loss, and navigating these systems, all while facing, the threat of abuse in the family, possibly during lockdown. We've also seen, as a result of the pandemic, the frequency and lethality of violence increase. These stay-at-home orders and closures designed to protect the public, which we very much support, protect the public from widespread infection, have left many survivors unfortunately isolated or trapped at home with their abusers. With increased job loss and unemployment, many survivors have also become more financially entangled with their abusers. And one of the things that we know to be true is that economic independence is a critical factor in violence prevention. This has really become, for us at least, for our advocates, and for the survivors who are presenting, a bit of a pandemic within a pandemic. So what we know and what we are hearing is that investing in prevention programming right now can reduce and even stop these rates of violence while diverting from the need for carceral and criminal justice interventions as a method to deal with perpetration. Over the summer, as Virginians and as policy leaders, as those of us who are justice focused, have grappled with questions like, how do we ensure safety and justice for all? What does accountability look like? Our sexual and domestic violence advocates have been listening to what survivors of violence and their families have told us, which is we want violence prevention, not incarceration. And as legislators have been adopting strategies and taking action to divert from incarceration in favor of programs that seek to build stability and wholeness, this has just been particularly true for our folks. Our programs, those 16 programs that are able to invest in prevention work statewide, they coordinate a variety of evidence-informed public health strategies that build healthy norms that reduce the likelihood that perpetration or victimization will ever occur in their communities. And so for folks who aren't familiar with what these programs look like, they look like teaching young people the skills required to build healthy relationships, helping parents and families navigate systems and build skills in coordination with their local community services boards, with in-home visitors, with allied professionals, to foster parent-child attachment, developmentally appropriate communication and expression in youth, access to health care, and to support social emotional learning. Also, I know that the previous speaker was mentioning items like paid family and medical leave and sick leave, earned income tax credits and child tax credits. Those are also things that support the economic conditions in which we know families can thrive a bit more and are considered to be protective factors against things like sexual and domestic violence. Our local programs also provide training and resources and tools for school administrators, for faith leaders, for community partners on ways to create healthy and violence-free environments and recognizing and responding to harmful behaviors that might be risk factors for future violence. These are, I mean, the form that these prevention programs take in local communities and out of our sexual and domestic violence agencies are really diverse. They match the community needs. They essentially provide a forum through which many different community actors, community leaders, and families can come together and say, what are the most pressing issues that are impacting our communities that lead to greater risk of sexual and domestic violence perpetration and victimization. And communities can come together and build whatever they believe the solutions might be and follow kind of those best practices in public health that we know to be true, that work in substance abuse prevention, suicide prevention, and all these different kind of public health arenas. So these are evidence-based prevention programs that we believe are the cornerstone for ensuring the long-term health and resilience of all Virginians and a key factor in preventing all forms of systemic and interpersonal violence. And as such, in 2021, we are going to be asking the legislature and our allies and partners to once again reinvest those funds that were initially invested or allocated to violence prevention, reinvest those in this new program and in supporting wide-scale, larger impacts in reducing violence across the Commonwealth.
Thank you. We do have one. I'm sorry. With the full funding of VA help with violence.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that? I missed that.
I'm echoing. With full funding of VA with domestic violence.
Yeah, I believe it would. There are a few different models that if y'all are familiar with the social determinants of health and a lot of different public health models that point to various protective factors and different sources of funding that also impact sexual and domestic violence in the same way that they would housing insecurity and other issues that are facing our communities. So yes, and thank you for the question.
Jonathan, thank you so much for your attention to these important issues, especially now, and for highlighting those for our members. We look forward to working with you through the session. Our next speaker is the Commonwealth Secretary of Finance, and we are always delighted to welcome Aubrey Layne to our pre-session. We depend on his expertise in managing our expectations of what can be done with